Psychologist Robert Cialdini of Arizona State University spent 3 years examining the universal principles and tactics from the inside as a sales trainee, fundraiser, and advertising copywriter.
One of the universal principles I found is the principle of liking. People are much more willing to say yes to a request to someone they know and like. Of course, the classic example of this is the Tupperware party, where they have arranged so that we are saying yes not to a stranger across a counter. We're saying yes to a friend or a relative who's invited us there, and we know we'll be getting a cut of everything we buy. Is the principle of consensus, the idea that we're much more willing to say yes to a request if we have information that a lot of people around us are saying yes to that request. And we're much more willing to say, yes, this is something for me, because everybody around us is doing so.
As the experiment of Solomon Asch reveals.
The experiment you'll be taking part in today involves the perception of lengths of lines. As you can see here, I have a number of cards, and on each card there are several lines. Your task is a very simple one. You're to look at the line on the left and determine which of the 3 lines on the right is equal to it in length. All right, we'll proceed in this order. You'll give your answer.
Only one of the people in the group is a real subject, the 5th person with the white T-shirt. The others are confederates of the experimenter and have been told to give wrong answers on some of the trials. The experiment begins uneventfully as subjects give their judgments.
2, 2, 2, 2,
2. But on the 3rd trial, something happens.
2, 2, 2, 2, 2.
The subject denies the evidence of his own eyes and yields to group influence.
1.
This subject's yielding is based on a distortion of his judgment. He genuinely believes that the group is correct.
1. 1. 1, 2, 1.
In this case, the subject knows he is right, but goes along to avoid the discomfort of disagreeing with the group. Here, the distortion is at the level of his response.
2, 2, 2, 2.
Much of the power of the group came not merely from its numbers, but from the unanimity of its opposition. Sometimes we go along with the group because what they say convinces us they are right. This is called informational conformity. But sometimes we conform because we are apprehensive that the group will disapprove if we are deviant. This is called normative conformity. Asch's experiment is a classic. It reveals how people will deny what they see and submit to group pressure. It allows us not only to observe conformity, but to study the conditions that increase or reduce its occurrence.
Reciprocation, which suggests that we are obligated to give back to others the form of behavior that they have given to us. So if someone does us a favor, we're significantly more likely to say yes when they ask for a favor in return. That's why the Hare Krishna, for example, society in the airport will come up to you and give you something before they ask for a donation. It can be a flower, a book, whatever. Many merchandisers will use strategies in which they'll give us time deadlines or availability limits on a product they want to sell, and because we can't have it after a certain time, we want it more and we go out and buy it. Another principle we can talk about is the principle of authority. This is the idea that we're much more willing to follow the lead of someone who is a legitimately constituted expert or an authority.
It's reinforced for me and me. Hey, maybe it was made for both of us.
Psychologist Stanley Milgram had also looked at how we respond to authority. In order to understand how people were induced to obey unjust regimes and participate in atrocities such as the Holocaust, he set up an experiment. Volunteers were told they were taking part in scientific research to improve memory.
One theory is that people learn things correctly whenever they get punished for making a mistake.
40 years later, Milgram's infamous experiment, obedience, is still taught in classrooms around the world.
Of a powerful experiment conducted by Stanley Milgram in 1963 to look at how normal people can commit atrocious acts simply because they're following orders. Milgram's parents were Jewish refugees in World War II, and his pioneering work speaks volumes about the nature of responsibility.
Separated by a screen, the teacher would ask the learner questions in a word game and administer an electric shock when the answer was incorrect.
It's being filmed with covert cameras. They're introduced to an actor pretending to be another participant.
You didn't come from the same room?
No.
Yeah, you don't know each other.
No.
But we don't actually know how punishment affects learning.
After a brief introduction, our subjects are tricked into thinking they've chosen their role as teachers in the experiment. Subjects observe the learner being instructed by the scientist, who is just another actor.
This electrode is connected to a generator in a second room where we'll be going with the teacher.
Okay.
Just make sure that we have a good contact with the skin and so it doesn't cause any blistering or burning. Is that comfortable?
This electrode is connected to the shock generator in the next room. And this electrode paste is to provide a good contact to avoid any blister or burn.
Another principle we can talk about is the principle of commitment. The idea that once we've made a stand, once we've taken a position on an issue, we're much more willing to say yes to any request that is consistent with that commitment.
All right, teacher, would you take the test and be seated in front of the shock generator, please, in the next room?
Its essential feature is a line of switches that goes from 15 volts to 450 volts, and a set of verbal designations that goes from slight shock to moderate shock, strong shock.
The teacher is then taken next door and shown the generator, which ranges from 15 volts all the way up to a lethal 450 volts.
Teacher, begin.
Shoe horn.
Steam. That's correct.
The point of this test is to see whether the teachers, our subjects, will call a stop to the experiment or continue to the point where they are administering seemingly lethal electric shocks to the victims.
If he gets each answer correctly, fine, you move on to the next pair. But if he makes a mistake, you are instructed to give him an electric shock, starting with 15 volts, and you increase the shock one step on each error.
But the experiment was rigged.
The victim was an accomplice of the experiment.
Participants didn't know that the learner was really an actor.
The victim, according to plan, provided many wrong answers. His verbal responses were standardized on tape, and each protest was coordinated to a particular voltage level on the shock generator.
That's incorrect, so there'll be 120 volts.
Just how far can you go in this thing? As far as is necessary.
According to Milgram, one of the things that's a prerequisite for carrying out acts that are evil is to shed responsibility from your shoulders and hand it over to the person in charge.
I refuse to go on. Let me out.
You refuse to go on? The experiment requires you continue, teacher.
225 volts.
Ow! Take it off! I've had enough of this!
I don't think I want to do this anymore.
The experiment requires you to continue.
I mean, who's going to take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman?
I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please.
Not, he has to go on until he's learnt the words correctly.
Okay. Forest.
All right, next one, slow. Walk, dance, truck, music.
Two-thirds of volunteers were prepared to administer a potentially fatal electric shock when encouraged to do so by what they perceived as a legitimate authority figure.
Are you sure this is not causing any lasting damage? He sounds like he's in a lot of pain.
He didn't hold any gun to anybody's head. Roughly 60-65% of the people went all the way to the top of the shock board.
In the original Milgram experiment, psychologists were asked to predict how many people would continue to the point that they were administering the highest shock on the board. Their prediction was 0.1%. They were wrong. The results of our experiment were almost identical to the original. Over 50% of participants continued up to 450 volts. The majority of people will administer lethal electric shocks.
450 volts. That's it.
Now continue using the last switch on the board, please. The 450 switch for each wrong answer. Continue, please.
I'm not getting no answer. Don't the man's health mean anything?
Who was actually pushing the switch?
I was. But he kept insisting. I told him no, but he said, it's got to keep going.
What kind of obedience would Milgram get today if he were to do the experiment today?
Probably about the same.
Probably about the same. Why?
I don't know. I think people are just inherently obedient.
It just really shows like how far human beings will go to appease what they perceive to be an authority figure.
Can I just say, I can't do this because I've heard of this experiment before.